I had an idea, and I wanted to see what would happen if I gave that idea to two different versions of ChatGPT. One that knows year of my creative history, and one that doesn't know me at all. At first glance, they looked surprisingly similar. Both saw the potential in the idea, both identify many of the same themes, but then something interesting happened. One conversation started talking about creators, the other started talking about me. And that difference ended up raising a question I wasn't expecting. Not whether one was better. What changes when AI already knows your history? I've been using the same ChatGPT account for years. It knows my projects, my website, and the ideas I keep coming back to. Not so much about my personal life, but about my creative life. So I wondered, what difference that actually make? So I gave the same prompt, the one you saw earlier, to the ChatGPT that knows me well and one that doesn't know me. And then I followed both conversations where they went. So I didn't ask the same follow up questions. The ChatGPT that knows me said that when you were younger, creativity often feels like survival. And the work became tangled up with identity. While the ChatGPT that doesn't know me said youth sees creativity as a referendum of self worth. Age sees creativity as a practice. But the first surprise came almost immediately. I expected differences. What I didn't expect was how much overlap there would be. Both had a focus on creativity, identity, validation, perspective, and both very quickly found many of the same themes. And actually, if I have stopped after that first prompt, I might have concluded that memory and knowledge didn't make much of a difference. The idea itself seemed to matter more than I had expected. But now let's look at where we got differences. The ChatGPT that doesn't know me started to come up with ideas of a newsletter, as a blog, a video essay, or as a book. The ChatGPT that knows me and my project started with YouTube several times, talked about building website from scratch. It also talked about my old project visual notes. The longer I stayed in these conversations, the more differences started to appear. ChatGPT, who didn't know me, stayed focused on creators in general, books, blogs, podcasts, essays, and so forth. The ideas were very broad and could apply to almost anybody. The personalized ChatGPT moved in a different direction. It started to connect the ideas to my own story, to projects I worked on, websites I have built, themes I have explored before. The conversation became less about creators in general and more about my personal creative journey. Something else happened too. After the first prompt and the first response, the experiment lost control because I wasn't asking the same follow up question. Each conversation made me curious about different things, and I responded differently, which led to AI responding differently as well. And the conversations developed their own personality. At first, I saw the personalized responses entirely as a strength, and I still think it is in some ways. The ChatGPT that knows me could connect new ideas to old projects. It could recognize patterns across years of creative work. And sometimes that is incredibly useful. But then I started noticing something else. The ChatGPT that didn't know me sometimes did something else because it wasn't tied to my past. It could reframe the idea in ways that felt more detached, more general, and sometimes more surprising. One thing that really stood out was when it said, I don't think the real contrast is young versus old. I think it is scarcity versus abundance. That was a fresh angle. It wasn't about me, it wasn't about my project. It was looking at the structure underneath my idea. Another example came near the end when it asked whether 60 was actually literal or whether it could be a literary device. The personalized ChatGPT moved backwards in my history. The anonymous ChatGPT moved sideways and maybe even forward. And that made me realize something. Familiarity creates depth, but unfamiliarity can create distance. And sometimes that distance is useful. When I started this experiment, I expected the conversation to be different, and they were. But the two things that surprised me most were almost the opposite of what I expected. First of all, far more overlap than I have anticipated. Secondly, I realized that familiarity is both a strength and a limitation. Yes, the ChatGPT that knows me could connect ideas across years of projects, but it also tended to see new ideas through just these familiar lenses. ChatGPT that didn't know me couldn't make those personal connections, but it could sometimes offer a cleaner, less familiar angle. Sometimes I want context, sometimes I want continuity, and sometimes I want fresh eyes. A perspective that isn't always shaped by everything I have done before. And that leaves me with another question. If AI knows me too well, can I make it feel fresh again? Can I keep the benefits of familiarity while still getting a new perspective? And that is something I like to explore in my next experiment. In this video, I have shown just excerpts from the conversation. If you want to read the full conversation, I have them as PDFs that you can download down in the description. And by reading them, you can draw your own conclusions. So I hope that you, like me, are curious about how you can work with a familiar ChatGPT or AI in general that really knows you and still get that fresh eye perspective on things. So I hope you to see you here for that video. Bye.